This is the Weston Faily Funeral Home. By 3 Weston generations, the home was owned and was now in the care of Charlie Weston, who was great at his job, no question. However, Bert and Jacob, his funeral assistants, tended to lack in basic competence. Though they did mean well, Jacob and Bert would often fail to follow the instructions of Mr. Weston. In fact, I have a couple I'll mention. One day, Bert and Jacob were preparing a service for the late Mrs. Burgess. When Mr. Weston came to inspect, he noticed an obvious defect. Mrs. Burgess was turned all around. "Good gracious," he said. "She's upside down." Sure enough, at the foot of the box was her head, and her feet were at the head of the casket bed. But they rearranged Mrs. Burgess in no time at all and positioned her in the funeral hall. Luckily, no one else learned of the mistake, and things proceeded normally during the wake. On another occasion, the Horner family made a request to have music play after the last address, while the pallbearers carried the casket away. So the family gave Jacob and Bert a CD to play. Several days later, when it was time for the vigil, the 2 assistants found themselves in a pickle. For just as the casket was about to be hauled away, the recorded music began to play.
Hello? Anybody out there? Come on, let me out. This isn't funny, let me out.
Only it wasn't music that came from the CD. It was the noise of knocking and someone yelling to be let free. Horrified, the audience gasped, thinking that someone was trapped. The widow fainted, thinking that her husband had not died, but was being buried alive. Soon everything was smoothed over, though the crowd was still sober. It turned out that Bert and Jacob made a mistake, but it was an easy one to make. Instead of using the Horner's CD, Jacob grabbed a recording he made for Halloween, which was going to be used for a wonderful joke, to make his co-workers think they were burying the wrong bloke. But the wildest one to ever occur happened for the funeral of Mr. Burr. His widow came early to inspect the setup. She loved everything but her husband's getup. "Oh dear, I'm afraid this just isn't quite right. My husband always wore a dark suit, nothing light. Would it be possible to change his clothes? If not, it's no big deal, I really don't want to impose." With only an hour left to spare, Bert took an impossible dare. "Yes, Mrs. Burr, we will change your husband's outfit, and just in time for the family's visit." Satisfied, the widow Burr left the scene, and Jacob shouted, "Why didn't you come clean? It takes more than an hour to dress the dead." Bert replied, "Not if you just switch out the head." Jacob then realized the plan and said, "We can switch heads with Mr. Van Daan." Mr. Van Daan was having his funeral in the chapel next door. So, the 2 workers wheeled Mr. Burr across the floor. In the next room, the workers removed each head with a pop and switched out the bodies for the swap. Now Mr. Burr was dressed in dark clothes and was positioned in his funeral pose, while Mr. Van Daan's clothing was light, but everything for him turned out all right. When the widow Burr returned, she was no longer concerned. "Thank you for accommodating an old lady. My husband looks good, and the flowers are so pretty." The services proceeded as smooth as could be, and no one ever knew about the unusual deed. And that's it for our story, but before you go, there is something you really ought to know. Though Bert and Jacob mess up a lot, they do put in a lot of thought to care for your loved one after they have expired, and give them the funeral that they desired.